Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast, here with Benji Naesen for Stage 15 of the Tour de France 2021. The show is supported by Cole. Actually, my head's getting hot. I just got some merch from went to watch the stage, and they're handing out bucket hats, and I was like, I got to get me one of those. They know the sort of thing I like to wear. But I didn't actually watch the finish. It was too hot, and also I was too worried I'd miss the GC action if there was any. But maybe that was a bit too hopeful. Anyway, 191-kilometre stage. It starts with some rolling climbs. They don't look like too much on the profile because of the climbs they go to do later on. They didn't do the Monte du Mont-Louis. Then they do a long drag up to the Port d'Envalira in Andorra, 2,400 metres, the Endre de Grange descent in the Col de Bec-Chalis, which is quite hard, actually, 18-minute plus climb. It's the last climb of the day, 8%. There's some 12% sections there, then the descent into Andorra la Vella for the finish. Strong headwind on the main long climb of the day, unfortunately, and the descent. And, pretty hot. But Benji, monster break full of big names today, but no real GC. No one did the GC leapfrog today either.
Yes, indeed. And it didn't start off as a monster break. It was one person, a one-man army starting off early on, a rider that usually is known for the breakaways, but hasn't really been able to catch one this year so far in the Tour de France. And it was Thomas Gent who went on the attack, one of the first riders in the peloton. And he kept that up for a while, had a 30-second lead at a certain point with other people behind trying to attack as well, because we knew it's going to be more than one person. Too many riders and too many teams are willing to do something with this kind of stage. And they know that if they wait a tiny bit, then there are hills, like you mentioned. And on those hills, you see that the other group started forming. Kruijswijk, Dan Martin, Julien Bernard. We've got Ruben Guerrero, Aurélien Paré-Peintre. Thomas Gent eventually also in that group when he was caught by that group. And Dylan Teuns and Sergio Henao was the initial group. And a bit later, we saw another move. And then it became interesting because we've seen Jumbo attack multiple times here. First of all, with Wout van Aert. Then at a certain point, Sepp Kuss started attacking. We know that Kruijswijk was in the initial move. And right now, we've got a situation where Kruijswijk is indeed in that group one. And the second group was Van Aert, Kuss, Castroviejo, Van Baarle, Woods, Nibali, Elisson, Alaphilippe, Valverde, Pöstelberger, Gaudu, Madua, Fernandez, Quintana, Donovan, Pouls, Matthews, Izagirre, Latour, and Bonnamour. What a crazy break. But first notes, we've got satellite riders. 3 riders of Jumbo ahead of the peloton. We've got Teunissen still left for the Jonas. Is that enough?
I mean, to do what on these climbs? To pace? I mean, no, it's not. But the pace was really, really slow today. So Teunissen was there for a while. So was Cavendish. Cavendish only got dropped with 53 Ks to go because Benji's just described that break. Closest person, 24 minutes on GC. UAE parked it. In fact, Benji and I thought they could have gone even slower. They were keeping it at 8, 9 minutes. I was like, let it go to 15 minutes. Don't even worry about it.
Even
Well, no, they're still in the time cuts. They were still. Yeah, I was like, I don't know what you're worried about. So it was really easy in the group. Apparently, that people said after it was really easy until the burst at the end, the inevitable burst at the end. So is it enough? Well, if he has a puncture after Teunissen's dropped, if he wants the pace to increase, I mean, we'll talk about it afterwards.
He has a crash once again, for example.
He has a crash. He's crashed 4 times. Yeah, it's a problem. And just because that didn't happen doesn't mean it's necessarily the sensible thing to do. I mean, do you need Kruijswijk in that break? I don't really think so, to be honest. I think
it's a risky move, but I think the counterpoint towards this is that if you don't have Kruijswijk in the breakaway and his form is like the rest of the Tour de France, right, then he's not going to be there halfway to Port d'Envalira. So
true.
Yeah, that's the counterpoint to that. He's not good enough, I think, to stay in the peloton either at the moment.
Anyway, speaking of hot, high-altitude mountain climbs, our show partner, Cole, they produce performance cycling apparel in Italy at the base of Monte Grappa, and they've got the Mountain Air collection. It's been selling like hotcakes. Apparently, Benji and I were lucky to get some. If you want to pick up some of that Mountain Air kit or their new lightweight collection, you can use code LRTDF20 for 20% off during the Tour de France, LRTDF20. But Benji, apart from that, it was pretty simple. The 2 big breakaway groups joined, and then FDJ started pacing with Armirail, I think, for David Gaudu, Madouin after him.
Entire stage.
Poor bastard.
Poor man.
I feel pretty bad for Armirail. Anyway, they're at the front. They're getting some camera time. I went to check out the finish. And yeah, took a photo, and then I was like, nah, not gonna be able to see, like, because the way it was designed, they come in and then they do a left, and you're going to see them descending at 70 k's an hour. It'd be a reduced group anyway. So I scouted it, and then I went promptly back home with my bucket hat. But yeah, I thought with Ineos, Benji, it was obvious with Dylan Van Baarle and Castroviejo up the road, they would want to then use them on the descent off Anvillera, depending on whatever the weather was, and then Port Thomas and maybe Geoghegan if he could would pace on that climb. The question would be, would it be enough? And we saw Movistar actually, this is with the break up the road. The break is going to win. They got like 9 minutes. Movistar starting to pace with Garcia Cortina, but it did whittle the group down, Benji. But I mean, you could visibly see how strong that headwind was.
Yeah, you could. And it was at that point already, but it was rumored to be at the end of the stage as well in the last 50 kilometers, also headwind in certain places. So the attacks were, things that we were hoping for, but didn't seem likely with that news. And we indeed see Movistar take over. We saw, I think, Richie Porte pretty early on that climb already setting up for something. And we noticed in the break that Ineos was moving backwards in the group. And we saw Van Baarle and Castro moving backwards in the group, slowly but surely. And then certainly they were, at a certain point, the two last riders in the group. And it felt like they were simply waiting for the command. When do we drop? Let's just keep ourselves here and then instantly drop. And it didn't take that long. I think a few kilometers later, we saw them visibly dropping on the first move of someone in that group. I think Michael Woods went for it relatively early. A bit of information as a context is that this entire stage we had breakaway fights between Van Aert, Wout Poels, and Woods for the KOM. Wout van Aert took most of them eventually in the sprint against the other two. And I think Wout Poels got more points than Woods and is now leading again, but I'll have to check it a bit after the stage once we
Poels is
wrap
leading.
it up.
He's leading by 8 points on Michael Woods. So yeah, that battle, it's actually been, I've quite enjoyed it. I mean, they're foregoing stages, but it's really fun. Now Wout van Aert's getting involved in it, sprinting at the top of these.
It wasn't even the craziest sprint. Well, Wout Poels did beat Wout van Aert at one of the sprints, but I think that was more a positioning issue than an actual sprinting issue. Wout Poels actually has a decent sprint, like
he does.
No jokes. And the funniest sprint was at the intermediate sprint because Matthews was also in the break, and Matthews went for the intermediate sprint, and towards the end, in his usual being, decides, I want to sprint for this. I want the money. So he decides to sprint for it and almost beats Malcolm Matthews at the intermediate sprint. But hey, let's go back to the action, the breakaway and the GC.
Breakaway, headwind was, there was one section where they go from block headwind, turn right, had a hairpin. This is at the end of the climb. We're over 2,300 meters altitude. We've had most of the break dropping. We really just have Gaudu, Valverde, Kuss, and Nairo Quintana there, and Woods as well. And Quintana's attacked once. He attacks again, this time with the tailwind as he goes round the hairpin. He gets a pretty solid gap, actually. It was the right moment to attack. And if anyone in the GC group wanted to, that would be where they would do it. And he goes over the top of the Henri de Grange on his own with a decent gap. The problem is, this is like the main highway into Andorra from the French side. It's super wide, fast descent, and he's got a block headwind, and he's like 57 kilos. So behind him, he basically had, he didn't show the break for ages, Benji, by the way. It just didn't show the break for ages, but we presume Wout van Aert got on the front and he just started mashing it for Kuss, and he was in a group of like 8 riders, Valverde and Kuss and Gaudu being the most notable in that group, and they caught Quintana pretty easily. So that was a bad sign for GC, and in GC, we saw no attacks. We saw it was really sad, actually. I felt really bad for them. We saw Dylan Van Baarle. The camera angle is at the crest, or below the crest of the tallest climb of the Tour de France. You see Van Baarle and Castroviejo waiting, looking behind expectantly, and they see a group of like 10, 15 GC riders led over by Thomas, I think, or whoever it was.
Instead of Carapaz alone, and the sadness arrived on their face.
Yeah, and Purstieberger was there too, I think, for a Kelderman attack, which, I mean, Jesus. But
that's very hopeful, no offense.
Yeah, those poor guys. And so they basically... Oh, yeah, Benji, describe the aerodynamics. So Martin did get dropped. The pace from Ineos was reasonable. Hey, his aerodynamics on this descent was something to, wasn't great.
Yeah, basically he had his jacket open the entire time. And you know that once you get over the crest with let's say 10, 15 seconds behind the group of the Ineos riders, you've got Castro and Van Barle now pacing like a madman at the front of the Carapaz group, and you are behind that. And there's no one with you to really help. And you've got a shirt of Cofidis open, so you're basically having a parachute on this descent, which is obviously not going to work well aero-wise, and that's not going to help you get to them much quicker. And when I saw that, the second that I saw that he was riding the descent with a jacket open against two Ineos riders going ham on the descent, I knew he's going to lose minutes today. And the advantage he built yesterday, it's gone already.
I mean, there was even a flat section where he could do the jacket up, and he's like, "Nah, I want my jersey open." They're going 105. Kruijswijk topped out at 105 k's an hour on this descent, and it's like at 30 k's an hour, it doesn't make that much of a difference. But I think at 105, it actually does, especially when you're trying to pedal afterwards. Anyway, as with yesterday, as you could probably expect, or you understand from the groups and the headwind, the race promised a lot. It kind of petered out GC-wise. Largish group at this point. All the contenders there, apart from Guillaume Martin, if you want to be generous to him. And it was really about who was going to win from the break. We saw Wout van Aert pacing for Kuss. Kruijswijk had gone back. I think he'd been dropped, and he was in the Jumbo-Visma group. Wout van Aert's pacing on the descent and the valley for Kuss. And that suggests straight away Benji was getting very nervous with money on Wout van Aert that Kuss was their man.
Doesn't influence my mood. In all honesty, it doesn't influence my mood, and I was already seeing some weakness throughout the stage for Van Aert. I wasn't sure because on the Port d'Envalira he was jumping from wheel to wheel, and it was really impossible to see whether he did that on purpose or whether he was actually dropping at that point. But he eventually outsprinted everybody on that climb, which means that I thought, okay, he still got the energy, but they specifically chose to use Wout van Aert in the descent to catch back with a Quintana move that happened at the top. And in all honesty, it went pretty well because he caught back up, and then he didn't really keep on pacing too hard. He just like switched around with a few people and relayed, and Kuss was indeed their man. And on paper, the initial part of this Bachalis climb is definitely one that fits Kuss, the uphill section there. He also lives in the area, but that counts for like half the peloton. Whenever anybody brings that up, it's like, yeah, he lives in the area, so he knows it. Everybody knows these climbs. Everybody lives there.
Benji, I know the climbs around here better than Tadej Pogacar. I've done this climb, so really,
you're gonna win the tour, mate.
If you just put me in, I would have dropped him today. That's how it works. If you just know the climbs, but I think it actually did help a little bit. Joking aside, it did help a little bit on the descent afterwards. So they get to the final climb. Race got 5 minutes. Kuss doesn't attack straight away. He doesn't attack straight away. It's Quintana who attacks again. Undertaker GIF comes back from the dead, attacks again. Then he gets dropped. Valverde's looking good. He's marking moves. Godou tries something, gets dropped pretty quickly. And it sends Sepp Kuss with Valverde's on the front a little bit, and then Kuss attacks pretty hard. Valverde's on his wheel, and then you just see the gap open up. And I was thinking, has Kuss gone too early? Is it like Catalunya again? But he was motoring. He opened that gap up to like 28, 29 seconds. We had some Italian time gaps today, unfortunately, but seemed to be pretty consistent at 25 to 28.
Italian time gaps.
Valverde was, he clearly had to ride his own pace. Kuss was way too strong, and the plan for Jumbo-Visma to go for the stage was working. They get to the top. Kuss has still got a 25-second gap. He knows the descent. I think he did the descent about at the same time as Valverde, maybe quicker. I think quicker on the descent, actually, because he posted up at the end and, keeps that 25, 28-second gap and wins in Andorra la Vella, where he lives for a lot of the year. Sepp Kuss lives near me, actually, and, beats Valverde, the old hat, who's 23 seconds behind him. Wout poles with another good sprint for third. Then Izagirre, Guerrero, Quintana, Godou, Martin, Bonamor. Bonamore's actually been quite good, Benji. And then Pogacar 10th. Nibali 11th. Alaphilippe not looking... just not looking as, that top-class climbing level at the moment. It's a little bit too hard for him. He came 12th, Powell's 13th. But Benji, GC group attacks. Ineos tried pacing the last climb. I'll cut it short. Carapaz tried once. Pogacar closed it easily. Vingegaard attacked. Pogacar closed it easily. And then they stopped. O'Connor tried a couple of times. Kelderman shut him down and then got dropped a little bit. And they all finished in a group. So should we expect anything else really from these guys when most of the stage has been super easy for them?
Well, I wouldn't say that all stages have been easy for them, but I would say that
Most of this stage.
on this parkour, we weren't expecting more. We said it yesterday that we were expecting action from the GC riders on the final climb because beforehand didn't really fit. I was a bit hopeful, of course, during the stage. Ooh, might be fun if they try and attack on the Port Valira, but nope, that didn't happen. And yeah, it was somewhat how we expected it. We expected the stage to not be the most important one for GC, and it turned out to be that way. And I think there's more important ones coming with, like, for example, Porte on stage 17 and on 18, Luzardiden. Those are the two ones I'm looking for because they've got an actual uphill finish.
I know, yeah. The ascent finishes really reduce the incentive to try so much. And then the headwind really nullified the long-range attacks. That headwind just stuffed this stage completely. Also, Pogacar looked, in my opinion, way more comfortable than on Ventoux. And the pace wasn't... Ineos paced a lot harder throughout the day. And so there is a question, Benji, that we should answer, which is Jumbo-Visma not riding for Jonas at all today. They're pretty much leaving him isolated. He is so far behind Tadej Pogacar. The GC standings, pretty much all the gaps are the same. Pogacar over 5 minutes ahead of everyone else. The only dropout is Martin going down to 9th. But yeah, this is what Vingegaard said to the Danish reporters straight after the stage. He said, it was a special stage because the break went. This is a transcription for someone in my Discord, so maybe wrong, but it should be right. He's Danish. It was a special stage because the break went, and at the time it was actually pretty tough. But after the break went, it was ridden at a calm pace, and I don't think it was that tough. It was probably not to my advantage. I had probably hoped it was a little bit more emaciating today than it actually was. Me speaking, like the Ventoux stage when Ineos paced. Now him again, it was more like, what do you call it, a big power output at the end instead of being busted up during the stage. I like it when we've ridden a long day and everyone's toast at the end. Then the reporter asked him, but then you should have had some teammates with you to set the pace. I know it's hard to discuss when it went as it did, i.e. Kuss winning. Vingegaard said, yeah, it's tough. Also, because if you wanted to try something early on, then you would have needed someone out front because the descents are super fast here. So you would lose so much of the peloton. It wouldn't make any sense if you didn't have anyone out front. And yeah, we won the stage, and I'm happy for Kuss. So is there anything to read into that, Benji?
Well, I think that if you look at how they played this, they had 3 people in the breakaway. They specifically chose to go for the stage, which is not a bad thing to do, but it shows us that, at least for me, that they are aiming for a podium and not to try and put pressure on Pogacar, which I somewhat understand. Like, I understand that. Like, they want to get as much out of this tour as possible, but they think that this is a more realistic goal than winning the Tour de France right now. And I think that Vingegaard in itself will do well for a podium, even if he's isolated. But the problem there is, what if he has a crash, or what if he has a puncture, stuff like that. If for example, in that descent or towards the end of the climb, there he had Kruijswijk already. But if it happens earlier, the cars were not directly behind the elite group. So good luck trying to get back while Movistar and Ineos are pacing like a madman at the front of that group to try and launch Carapaz, who doesn't launch eventually because Custer and Van Barle are there then. Yeah, stuff like that. It's always dangerous. There's always that tiny danger, but like, in hindsight, everything worked out perfectly. They had Kruijswijk drop back at the exact perfect time to be useful at the top and in the descent of the Port Valira. We had Wout van Aert drop just at the bottom of the Bergchalice to be useful in the descent of the Bergchalice. So that's all perfect. So in the end, the stage worked perfectly for a rider that is playing relatively defensively. But on the other hand, he tried on the last climb and he couldn't drop them. If he had dropped them,
the pace was too low.
Yeah,
Ineos did it pacing, and they did it slower than Kuss, who'd been in the break all day. The pace was Castro pacing. It was like on Ventoux. And so the question for me is, Kuss, fantastic stage win today. He's now won a stage of the Tour de France and the Vuelta. Where was he 4 days ago on Mont Ventoux in similar weather? That could have made a huge difference for Jonas Vingegaard. And now today he's won the stage. He wasn't there on Ventoux. Maybe that's just bad legs. That seems to be what happened. He had good legs today. But yeah, it seems like Jonas, if he wants to get a gap, he needs someone to pace hard on the middle climb, harder than Ineos did, and maybe not have the unlucky headwind, and then actually pace harder on that last climb. Because it basically was Ineos pace with Castro, not really dropping anybody at all. Carapaz attacks once, pace stalls completely. Jonas tries a couple of times when everyone's looking at each other and the pace hasn't been high. So, yeah, it's a shame for him. But again, as Benji said, to get on the podium, Jonas doesn't need to do anything from here till stage 20.
Yeah, exactly.
He's only 14 seconds behind Uran. I mean, he's still trying. Benji, at this point, I mean, what's even the point of him attacking today? I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's the last climb.
I agree, because this guy he's a young rider. He hasn't had the experience of a 3-week leadership. He's likely going to end up having some limitation at some point in this Tour de France, most likely. So if you're at this point, you've got a rest day tomorrow, you've got a average mountain stage the day after with a flat ending. I think that you're going to try and save as much energy as possible until Col du Portet and then try and do the best climb of your life. Because I think if you're Jumbo, that is the day where you put everything on Jonas Vingegaard on the Col du Portet stage.
I think once he got to 1K left on Becchalis, you're not going to make significant time on Pogacar, even if he, whatever happens to him. You're right, Benji. Stage 17 really is the one. That's something we'll talk about in the recap tomorrow. Yes, sir.
I just find it interesting to see how all the teams use their satellite riders differently. You've got Ineos, of course, who use it for the descent, and it wasn't the move where Carapaz attacked towards the satellite riders. It was just that they replaced the riders they spent on Port d'Envalira with the 2 riders that were up front, and then they had them for the next climb. So that was interesting. And then you have Movistar, who decided not to use Valverde. It would have been so funny if they called them back. Just imagine if they called back Valverde.
That's not how that team works.
Mate, we need Netflix content, okay?
Imagine
I need to watch a good series next season.
They call him back to pay some mass. Maybe they did. The earpiece wasn't in.
Would be so funny. But that's one of them. I'm also kind of surprised that we didn't see, Uran decided to try and go for an attack as well,
What was the
he
point?
had Guerrero and Paulos at the front. Was it perhaps a plan to have Paulos drop back if it works as well? Stuff like that. It's interesting to dissect what could have happened on the stage if gaps opened up, but they didn't happen, and that's the end of the story. And I think that all in all, Jumbo must be very happy with what they did today. They made a risky move not having anyone with Vingegaard for a portion of the stage, but it completely paid off. So, yeah. And that's always a story, because one bad move in a stage like this does not define the outcome. Having one rider in the peloton perhaps would have been less risky, but on the other hand, we don't know if that would have been super helpful if Kruijswijk dropped after 5 kilometers on the initial climb in the peloton instead of the breakaway then. So stuff like that is difficult to dissect, and I think all in all, they should be happy with their performance today. And when it comes to the next couple of stages, I think that they've still got opportunities to go in the breakaway again. On a stage 16, I wouldn't know if you need too many riders in the peloton. I would put riders next to Vingegaard, but Van Aert could try again on stage 16, stuff like that. And then we have stage 17. Like I mentioned, that's the one. And that's the one where I expect them to work for Jonas, because if they don't, then I'd feel a bit sad.
All right, let's skip Jumbo. I mean, Jumbo-Visma, they've got 5 riders left in the Tour. Any other team would be incredibly jealous of how they're doing since Roglic left the Tour de France.
Has 3.
They got 3. Buani abandoned today. UAE, Benji, just quickly, they're not feeling. It's not mattered at all. Pogacar looked bored on the last climb, but the team is not looking that good. I even think there's some. I think Bjerg and co, they pace too hard sometimes and almost put themselves under pressure.
Yeah, and there's more to that. At the start of the stage, they start off before the climb at the back of the peloton instead of the front.
Every day.
And that's why they drop every time before they can do something. And like you mentioned, they pace too hard. Today, it could have easily been 15 to 20 minutes for the breakaway. And by doing that, you are putting a Jumbo and an Ineos with satellite riders in the breakaway under pressure, because then they're going to be the gap is becoming fairly large now. If you want to call back Custer and Van Baarle, they're going to have to wait 20 minutes by the side of the road. So the more that gap is, without endangering your GC position, the better it is for UAE, because they can, first of all, put pressure on the other teams for rethinking their strategy. And perhaps Jumbo would have said, we're going all out for the stage when if the gap is 15 minutes, without calling too many people back. And then you, for example, have, well, also more energy in the peloton because you're not spending as much if you don't pace as much. The problem then is, what are you going to do if the gap is 20 minutes and you're Mark Cavendish and you know that there's a climb coming? Are you going to put somebody at the front of the peloton if you're still in it to make sure that the gap to the break is not that large so you don't drop 15 minutes from the peloton and BOTL?
Oh, he was fine. When I saw him dropping, I was like, he must be laughing. He's got only 50 Ks to do with his whole team there. Yeah, that easy for him. So UA, I definitely think that stage, Benji and Mark stage 17, I don't have too much confidence in that team at all. So that is one to really try Pogačar on. Ineos have the more fulsome team to do it, Benji. The problem for Ineos is Carapaz is the problem. I think Ineos with, Thomas crashing so much, Poor crashing, Geoghegan Hart crashing, they're still trying things, automating the race, making it harder when they can with that headwind. Carapaz just doesn't have the legs. And Inigo San Milan, the coach of Tadej Pogačar, he wrote an article about this. It's quite interesting, talking about how like the power numbers. He basically called everyone complaining about Pogačar a filthy casual who only tunes in for the Tour de France and didn't watch Tirreno Adriatico or any other race, which is half true, to be honest, because the watts per kilo are nowhere near Pratidativo watts per kilo, where Yates was 8 seconds behind Tadej Pogačar. And he was like, Pogačar literally did like 5.9 under his threshold on teen, and just no one followed him. And he was like, this is super weird. And so what I'm saying is, Benji, Carapaz's legs are not where they need to be.
Yeah, but one counterpoint for that is that the day before we had, well, that same day, by the way, like in O'Connor and so forth, he was riding at more than 5.9, right? And the gap went down. Because like, I'd like to see like the full math of like the riders compared to each other.
No,
because
I think you're right in saying I think your coach is also being a bit disingenuous, and he's picking the last 10 minutes of the last stage at the end of 3 days of the hardest racing in the Tour that I can remember in a row, and he's like, oh, the watts per kilo weren't crazy at the end of that third stage. It's like, well, the fight for the break in the previous 3 stages. They've been fighting for 5 hours at maximum. O'Connor did 6.2 to get in the break for 20 minutes. So, like, yeah, of course, the watts aren't that high at the end. I guess my point is, Benji, have you been disappointed by Carapaz?
I think that I have, because I would expect the Carapaz to be able to drop an Iran and so forth on a climb. And so far, that hasn't happened. Is that because Iran is in better or more consistent form? It's hard to say.
I don't think so.
I think it's just very difficult because, like, the San Milan guy is obviously, like, putting out the numbers and so forth, but that's not transparency all around. We don't know more than just what he says, and it's hard to delve a conclusion from what he says because he's talking about Tinia, but I'd like to see all the stages around it as well. I'd like to see more to be able to see whether the level is actually lower at the moment, because...
It is.
Okay.
It is. Like the watts per kilo, but the thing is, it's like, well, the level is lower compared to, say, or maybe pick Adam Yates at Catalunya, but Adam Yates at Catalunya wasn't riding in 10 degrees raining after a week of everyone crashing 6 times, not having teammates in stage 7, chasing a break. Like, I think he didn't really take into account how hard stage 7 was when he's like, oh, Pogačar on Grand Bonnard, he only did 6.15 for this time. That's normal for him. But I'm like, yeah, but stage 7 was super hard and it's cold, so that's maybe why everyone's not doing so well. I think the problem for Carapaz is he attacks, Pogačar closes him. Okay, he can't drop Pogačar, and then he sits up, and then Uran and Kelderman catch back up. So he's kind of stuffed tactically. For the rest day, who do you think is happiest after this second week, Benji? You think Uran? I'd be super happy if I was Uran.
Yeah, of course, if you're Iran, then you're looking relatively happy. I think also, in general, I'd say that compared to last week, I'd be happy if I'm Jumbo in this situation. Last week, they were completely disappointed with everything that happened. And right now, compared relatively to last week, I'd be very happy with the situation, with the team you have. 2 stage wins, your guy is literally riding for the podium. Your youth talent that might...
Polka dots.
Yeah, polka dots are close, but not really caught yet. So it's going to be curious where he's going to try and catch that back, stuff like that. And there's still opportunities left on the table, so they can definitely still do stuff. So if I'm Jumbo, I'm pretty happy with this so far. Then when it comes to the other teams, I'd say when you're Ineos, you're relatively disappointed. Right now, you would have been more happier if you saw Carapaz already with at least the strength to beat the riders surrounding him. The fact that the Kelderman is still close, so close to him, and O'Connor. The fact that Lutsenko is within a minute and a half of him in GC, stuff like that is something that I would not have expected beforehand. And he's one of the riders that, to my knowledge, has not crashed yet, I think. So on paper, he has that benefit compared to a lot of the riders surrounding him. And obviously, if you're Tadej Pogacar, you're very happy with what happened so far. And yeah, you're still having cruising. A similar lead to what you had before this week. So very cool to see so far. Controversial topic. If and only if Primož Roglič was here, do you think he'd be able to compete with Pogacar? I think yes.
Yeah, of course. I mean, of course he would have been able to. Like, it's, as I said, though, I mean, of course he might have also gotten a little bit cold on stage 8 and had one of those days where he mysteriously
his vest is
super cracks.
Broken, yeah, and his vest gets stuck in his back wheel, and then he loses 3 minutes on a stage like Formigal.
Okay. Yeah, that could have happened as well. So I think, as I said, the level is not crazy high. To think that Roglič has been neck and neck with Pogacar in every race, physiologically, not in terms of not crashing, but physiologically neck and neck for the last 2 years, sometimes beating him, sometimes losing to him, of course he would have been competitive. Well, if, and this is the big if, he didn't crash. It's like saying, I think Thomas would have been competitive too if he didn't crash. I think the way the races played out meant that everyone was cooked by stage 8. All the main GC contenders, the big ones, were crashed out or abandoned, and then Pogacar just attacked. And because there's no one on his wheel, you really see what he can do. And Carapaz couldn't really perform at the level he needed to. But yeah, we'll talk about that more on the Rest Day podcast
I've got one
tomorrow.
Final thing.
Okay, one final thing.
We've seen now Nairo Quintana go in the attacks twice. He tries and goes for KOM, and he always blows up. He always implodes.
Yeah,
and it's like he doesn't know his limits. And we saw this today on Berchalis where he attacks twice and then he...
Like
1 minute later, he's done for. Stuff like that. And it's just, he doesn't seem to know his limits, and it suddenly comes and he's done. And he attacks so much that I don't think he's going to win KOM unless something odd happens to the other people. Wout Poels is looking really good for that. He's still looking good, and Wout Poels tends to grow in the race as well. So that does benefit him. I'd love it if Van Aert is sprinting against the other Wout for it quite a few times in the next couple of days. And I think that the rest of the topics can stay for tomorrow. But all in all...
Quintana today, he shouldn't have attacked on the... I know he tried high altitude. It's his opportunity. It's what he would have planned. But the headwind was so strong, he basically spent a lot of energy on the Andorra climb. And then who knows what he could have done. Could he have followed Kuss? I doubt it. But maybe if he just didn't attack and tried to follow, he could have been able to. But it doesn't seem to be his way. Any other topics?
Not really. That's about it for now, at least.
All right. Tadej, let us know down below. Is GC wrapped up? Is Tadej Pogacar going to win this Tour de France? Hot takes only. But otherwise, we'll see you with the Rest Day recap tomorrow.
Greipel.
Ciao. Yeah, Greipel. Jesus. Sneaking that one in.